The world is still cloaked in shadows. It is a quiet morning in the year 1752 in the British American colony of Massachusetts. The sun has not yet risen above the pine-covered hills, and the winds are gentle, brushing through the clapboard houses like a sigh. Along a narrow dirt road, nestled beside a modest wooden chapel, sits a small home and workshop belonging to Thomas Everley, the town's candlemaker. Thomas stirs from his slumber before the first cockcrow. The room is chilly, the hearth long gone cold in the night. The faintest glow from the dying embers flickers softly on the stone floor, offering just enough light for him to find his boots. He rises carefully from his straw-stuffed mattress, not wanting to wake his wife Margaret, or the children still bundled tightly in wool blankets. The wooden floor creaks under his step as he moves into the main room. This space is both kitchen and workshop, shared equally between family and craft. On one side of the room, a workbench, a rack of drying tallow candles, and a row of pewter molds. On the other, a simple table, a small cupboard, and hanging herbs Margaret uses for cooking and medicine. With practiced motion, Thomas adds a few sticks to the hearth and strikes steel against flint. A few sparks catch the tinder, and soon the fire begins to grow. A warm, golden flicker stretches across the room, chasing away the grey veil of early morning. This is the first light of the day, not from the sun, but from the hand of the candlemaker. He wraps a thick woolen shawl around his shoulders and steps outside. The air is cool and damp with dew. A thin mist still floats between the maple trees along the edge of the woods. Chickens stir in their coop, and somewhere, a horse snickers softly in a neighboring barn. A dog barks far off in the distance, perhaps a farmer beginning his morning rounds. Thomas walks to the shed behind his home and retrieves a heavy iron kettle. It smells faintly of animal fat and smoke, the scent clinging from yesterday's work. He carries it inside and places it over the growing fire. Today, he will render tallow, fat collected from the local butcher, to make the coarse, smoky candles most families in the colony rely on. Not far away, the townspeople are also waking. Some prepare for the short ride to market, others to the fields, still others to church. But they all depend on Thomas's work. In a world with no electricity and only limited daylight, candles are more than a luxury. They are a necessity. They light hearths and prayer tables, workshops and schoolrooms, kitchens and cradles. And each one begins its life in places like this, small, smoky workshops, where sleep ends before dawn and labor begins before breakfast. As the kettle begins to warm, Thomas sits at the bench and pulls out his tools. Wick trimmers, molds, ladlers, and loops of flaxen string. His hands, roughened by years of work, move, slowly but deliberately, each motion part of a rhythm learned over decades. The day is young, but the tasks are many, and in this quiet hour, before the town comes alive, the candlemaker begins his humble ritual of light. As the fire builds to a steady crackle, the iron kettle above it begins to sweat with heat. Inside, thick chunks of raw animal fat slowly soften into liquid. Creamy white transforming into translucent gold, the scent of tallow begins to fill the air. It is not pleasant, pungent and heavy, but it is familiar. The smell of light, the smell of light, the smell of light. Thomas reaches for the long-handled wooden spoon and begins to stir. He leans over the kettle, steam rising into his beard, eyes squinting from the heat. His breath fogs in the cold room, mingling with the scent of wood smoke and rendering fat. He must keep the temperature even, never too hot, lest the fat scorch or bubble over. Margaret enters the room quietly, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She moves with the easy grace of someone long used to early mornings and shared duties. She places a hand gently on Thomas's shoulder and offers a sleepy smile. Without words, she begins preparing the children's breakfast. Oats with a pinch of salt and a drop of honey, if the pantry allows. On the small table beside the hearth, she lays out bowls and wooden spoons. The children will rise soon. For now, the couple shares the quiet, their unspoken rhythm of home and work, craft and care. As the tallow melts completely, Thomas pours it through a cloth strainer into a second pot, filtering out any sinew or bone. What remains is a smooth, pale liquid, pure enough to become candlelight. From a row of hooks near the ceiling, he pulls down a dozen strands of wick, cut and soaked the day before. These are made of twisted flax, though hemp or cotton is sometimes used, depending on what trade ships have delivered to Boston. Each wick is tied to a small stick, which will rest across the top of the dipping frame. Today will be a dipping day. Unlike molded candles, which use forms and hard waxes like beeswax, dipped candles are built layer by layer. Thomas takes the bundle of wicks. To the dipping frame, a simple wooden rig with crossbars. He lowers the first set into the kettle, submerging the strings completely. He lifts them slowly, the fat clinging to each wick, forming the thinnest skin. They hang to dry for a few minutes, cooling just enough, before he dips them again, and again, and again. Each layer must cool before the next is added. With each repetition, the candle grows, first like wet thread, then like the thinnest reed, and slowly, by patience alone, into something round and solid. It is a slow process. It cannot be hurried. The room is still quiet, save for the bubbling pot, the creak of the drying rack, and the occasional clink of iron against wood. Outside, the mist begins to lift, and golden morning light pushes through the window panes. Chickens cluck. A neighbor's oxen pull a cart past the house. From the distant meeting house, a bell rings once, marking the hour. The children come tumbling into the room, rubbing their eyes and sniffing the air. One grimaces at the tallow's scent, and the other giggles and asks if the candles will be ready by supper. Margaret hands them bowls and shoos them toward the table. Thomas smiles. The candles won't be ready for hours, maybe days, but they are begun, and that, in a candlemaker's world, is everything. By late morning, the house is fully awake. The children have finished their meal and scampered outside to tend the chickens and gather kindling. Their laughter drifts through the open window as they race past the garden gate, their boots leaving muddy tracks along the stone path. Inside, the warm, waxy air hums with quiet activity. The once thin candles now carry the weight of a dozen dips. They hang like pale carrots from the wooden rack, slowly thickening with each pass into the kettle. Thomas wipes the sweat from his brow with a linen cloth and adjusts the dipping frame to accommodate another dozen wicks. The work is repetitive but meditative. There is a rhythm to it. Dip, raise, cool, repeat. With time and care, what began as string will become a source of light, perhaps for a family reading scripture at night or a shopkeeper balancing his ledger by the fire. Not far away, Margaret is busy folding small bundles of beeswax. These golden bricks are precious, more expensive than tallow, and used for finer candles, altar lights, wedding tapers, or those requested by the wealthier families in town. Their scent is sweet, they're burned clean and long. A single beeswax candle might cost as much as a day's wages, but its glow is nearly smokeless and steady. From a shelf above the workbench, Thomas retrieves 2 beeswax molds, pewter cylinders smoothed with years of use. He rubs them down with a little oil to help the candles release more easily, and threads a wick through each. Beeswax will be melted separately, in a smaller iron pot, to avoid contamination with the tallow. Everything has its proper place in the candlemaker's shop. Outside, the sounds of town life have grown louder. Hooves clop down the street, wagons rumble past, and voices carry from the green, where merchants gather and neighbors greet one another with talk of weather and trade. The market is open. Thomas glances at the shelf beside the door where finished candles are stacked neatly in bunches. Thick ones for lanterns, thin ones for sconces, stubby ones for travel. He counts them silently, gauging how many are fit for sale. It's not enough to supply the entire town, but enough for a morning's run. Margaret hands him a basket, already lined with wool to protect the goods. He tucks in the bundles carefully, pressing in a little dried lavender between layers, not to mask the smell of tallow, which is impossible, but to soften it. He slips on his coat, worn and waxed against the weather, and steps outside. The sky has turned a clearer blue now, the morning mist burned away by a mild summer's sun. The wind carries the scent of pine and horses, firewood and bread. It's a good day for trading. The market lies just a short walk down the main road, past the meeting house and the cooper's shop, across from the blacksmith, whose hammering echoes like a heartbeat through the village. Stalls line the open green, makeshift, tables, carts and crates, filled with cabbages, eggs, fabric, and barrels of molasses. Thomas nods to familiar faces as he lays out his candles atop a cloth on his usual bench. He doesn't shout or barter loudly like others. His trade is steady. People come to him. Light, after all, is always needed. A farmer's wife purchases a dozen dipped tapers for her parlour. The minister's housemaid inquires about beeswax. A widower with rheumy eyes asks for the shortest, cheapest kind, just enough to read by at night. Thomas gives him 2 extra, quietly, and accepts only a few coins in return. Candle making isn't the most glamorous of trades. It's not as loud as smithing or as fragrant as baking, but it is trusted, it is dependable, it illuminates, and that brings a quiet kind of pride. As the midday sun rises high above the chapel spire, Thomas finishes his market business and starts the walk home. His basket is lighter, his pocket modestly full, but more than coins, he carries a satisfaction, knowing that his hands have made something useful, something that will brighten the homes of others when the sun slips once again beyond the hills. The walk home is slower. The sun hangs high in the blue sky, its warmth soaking into the wooden rooftops and gently steaming the dirt paths. Birds flutter between fence posts. A horse whinnies behind a barn. Thomas tips his hat to a passing neighbor and hums a soft, tuneless song, just the kind of idle melody a man sings when his morning has gone well. Back at the cottage, Margaret is outside, tending to the herb garden. Her sleeves rolled up, fingers dusted with soil. She offers him a smile, and he lifts the empty basket slightly, as if to say, they sold well enough. Inside, the tallow candles from the morning hang firm and fat. They are nearly complete, their waxy forms drying in the slightly cooler air of the afternoon. Thomas checks their shape with careful fingers, rotating each one on its string. He nods with satisfaction. By sunset, they will be ready for trimming. But now is the time for beeswax. He moves slowly, cleaning the tools with care. Before switching materials, the beeswax must remain pure, untainted by the smoky odor of tallow. Even a small trace could ruin the quality, and those who purchase beeswax expect its distinctive clarity, both in scent and in flame. He sets a smaller kettle over a separate fire and opens the sealed beeswax pouch Margaret prepared earlier. The golden bricks shine like captured sunlight, smooth and slightly sticky to the touch. Beeswax doesn't melt quickly, it needs time and patient heat. Thomas places the pieces into the kettle and watches as they begin to soften, their surface slowly folding inward like warm butter under the sun. The scent that rises is sweet and comforting, like honeycomb left out in the sun. It fills the small room with a soft fragrance, so different from the pungent tallow used earlier. Margaret often says it reminds her of summer meadows. While the wax melts, Thomas prepares the pewter molds. He threads each one with a flaxen wick, centered and taut, and gently oils the inside with a cloth dabbed in tallow. Not enough to contaminate, only to ease the release when cooled. When the wax has fully liquefied, golden and clear, Thomas lifts the kettle with a thick cloth and begins to pour. The wax flows slowly into the waiting molds, like amber syrup, into cups. He steadies each mold as the wax rises, filling them to the brim without a tremble or spill. Then he sets them gently onto the shelf to cool. It is delicate work. The molds must not be disturbed. Even a bump could ruin the shape, cause cracks, or misalign the wick. The cooling takes hours, sometimes until evening, but the result will be candles far superior. Smooth, firm, and long burning. Fit for parlors and prayer rooms, for scholars and shopkeepers who value more than just light. They value elegance, consistency, silence. With the beeswax poured, Thomas wipes down the workbench and takes a seat by the window, sipping the last of the midday cider. Margaret left for him. Outside, the children run along the creek's edge, chasing frogs and swinging sticks. A breeze stirs the lace curtains. Time slows, as it often does in the early afternoon, when the work is done but not yet finished. When the day tilts gently toward its golden hour, he looks over at the row of drying candles, tallow on the racks, beeswax in their molds, and allows himself a small quiet moment of pride. These are not just goods for trade. These are the hands of time turned into flame, threads of string and fat and wax transformed into warmth, safety, and glow. In a world ruled by sunlight and darkness, candle makers are keepers of the in-between. The sun has begun its long descent toward the western woods. Golden light filters through the leaves outside, dancing on the wooden walls of the candle maker's home. The heat of the day gives way to a cooler breeze that slips in through the open windows, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and distant baking bread from a neighbor's hearth. Inside, the candles are ready for their final touches. Thomas moves with unhurried purpose. From the wall, he lifts a small knife with a curved edge, its handle worn smooth from years of use. With it, he begins trimming the tallow tapers, snipping away the uneven bottoms and excess wick. Each candle is shaped, shaved, and straightened until it sits clean and even. What was once rough becomes refined. He works in silence, save for the soft scrape of blade on wax and the occasional creak of the floorboards. His hands are sure and careful. A slight nick, a missed edge. These small flaws matter in a world where every candle must burn without fail. Each trimmed candle is gently tied into bundles with thin twine, 6 to a bunch, the colonial standard, and set aside on a shelf above the fireplace. These are the everyday candles. They will sit on kitchen tables, rest in tin holders beside beds, and flicker beside cradles through sleepless nights. Their job is humble, to hold back the dark. But not all candles are ordinary. Thomas reaches into a small cabinet near the hearth and takes out a beeswax taper, freshly freed from its mold. Its surface is smooth and warm to the touch, its scent sweet and clean. This one is for the chapel. Every week he donates a candle to the little meeting house down the road, a tradition passed down from his father and his father before him. It is lit during evening prayer, placed on the altar in a simple brass holder. No matter how hard the week, no matter how many orders must be filled, the chapel always receives its candle. Margaret watches from the doorway as Thomas polishes the candle gently with a cloth, his expression soft and reverent. "You've always made that one slower than the rest," she says with a smile. Thomas nods. It deserves it. As he sets the candle aside, he sits down beside the hearth and stokes the fire once more. Not for wax, not for boiling, just for warmth. The light it casts is softer now, more golden than orange, flickering across the low ceiling like a living storybook. The children, now washed and changed into their evening clothes, settle on the rug. Margaret joins them, knitting in hand. The room hums with quiet peace. Thomas picks up a nearly spent candle, one of yesterday's, and sets it into a holder on the table. He lights it carefully with a taper from the hearth. The flame springs to life, small and steady, casting long shadows along the beams above. He looks at his children, eyes wide and sleepy, and leans forward just a bit. "Do you know," he begins softly, "that every candle tells a story?" The youngest tilts her head. "A story? Aye," he says, voice barely more than a whisper now. A candle begins as something unwanted. Fat, scraps, stems, things others throw away. But we melt them down, give them shape, and give them purpose. When we light the wick, it's not just wax that burns, it's everything that came before. The fire remembers. The children are quiet now, watching the flame. Margaret glances over, her smile touched with warmth and a trace of sadness. In this quiet corner of the world, stories like this are passed down not by books, but by memory, by firelight. By side, the sun is nearly gone, the sky turning lavender and deep blue. Soon, the world will grow dark, but inside the candle maker's home, light will remain, gentle, warm, and handmade. Gentle, warm, and handmade. Dusk wraps itself gently around the town. Outside the cottage, shadows stretch across the packed dirt road, spilling over stone fences and creeping up the clapboard siding. The trees along the edge of the property sway gently, their leaves whispering in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a dog gives one final bark before settling in for the night. The village slows, hammers still, wheels rest, voices hush. Inside the candlemaker's home, the glow of hand-poured light fills the room. The glow of hand-poured light fills the room. A half-dozen candles flicker from clay holders and tin sconces. Their flames sway softly, steadying the heart and calming the eyes. No harsh glare, no buzz, just a warm and golden hush that spills over the worn wooden table and the basket of folded linens nearby. Margaret sets out a simple evening meal: bran bread, boiled carrots, and a bit of salted pork saved from Sunday. The children wash their hands and settle onto stools, their cheeks pink from the fading day. The family bows their heads, and a quiet grace is spoken, thanking not only for food and shelter, but for light, for warmth, and for work. They eat slowly, without rush. Conversation flows gently, mostly in the form of stories, the kinds of stories told after chores are done and hands are clean. The children share tales from the creek, how one slipped on a rock, or how a frog escaped the grasp of a muddy hand. Margaret laughs softly, wiping crumbs from her chin. Thomas listens with a tired but contented smile. After the meal, Margaret and the children begin to tidy the room. Dishes are washed in rainwater, cloths are hung to dry. Thomas returns to his workbench one last time. The candles he dipped that morning have cooled completely. He lifts one from the rack and turns it in his hands, inspecting its shape. It's not perfect, slightly thicker near the base, but it will burn true. That is what matters most. He bundles the rest into neat parcels and places them in the key crate beside the door. Tomorrow is another market day. Another dawn of wax and wick. He snuffs the dipping fire with a metal lid, watching the last curl of smoke rise and vanish into the beams above. Then he walks quietly over to the shelf and takes down a small journal. Just a few pages, bound with twine. With a quill and inkwell, he records the day's work. July the 14th, 1752. 27 tallow dipped. 4 beeswax poured. Market sold 10 bundles. The script is simple, but each entry is a marker in time. A quiet record of a life not loud or wealthy, but full of meaning, full of service, full of light. He sets the book down and joins his family near the hearth. One final candle is lit on the mantel, a short, thick beeswax taper with a slow golden flame. It flickers in the quiet, its light touching every face in the room with soft shadows and a glow that feels like memory. Margaret hums a lullaby as she folds tomorrow's linen. The children curl up with blankets near the fire, their eyelids growing heavy. Thomas leans back in his chair, arms crossed gently over his chest, and lets out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The room is calm, the day is complete, and the light, his light, burns on. Night has fully settled over the village. The stars have begun to blink into view, scattered like spilled salt across a dark blue cloth. A crescent moon hangs low over the treetops, casting silver shadows across rooftops and fields. The wind has stilled, and even the forest has hushed, as if holding its breath in the presence of sleep. Inside the Everley cottage, the glow of the last few candles remains. Thomas sits quietly near the window, wrapped in a woolen shawl, a half-filled cup of cider resting in his hands. The flames flicker low and soft, their wax shrinking with each passing minute. Each candle, in its own time, bows to the dark. He gazes out into the quiet night. The village is cloaked in silence, no carriages, no clamour, just a few distant windows still lit, flickering like stars on earth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, and a dog stirs, then all is still again. Behind him, the children sleep peacefully in their shared bed. Bundled beneath patchwork quilts, stitched by Margaret's grandmother. Their faces are relaxed, lips parted slightly, dreaming perhaps of frogs and rivers and stories told in firelight. Margaret, too, has retired, her knitting folded and placed beside the rocker. She sleeps in the room just beyond, her breathing slow and steady, matching the rhythm of the wind outside. Thomas remains in the candlelight, reflecting not just on the day, but on the life. His fingers trace the rim of the cup as he thinks about how something so small as a candle could shape a person's entire existence. From his father's hands to his own, this trade, this craft, has been passed down like a sacred trust, not loud or lavish, but necessary. Honorable. Candles mark the passing of time. One burns while bread bakes, another while letters are written. Still, another for the telling of bedtime stories, or the reading of scripture, or the birth of a child. He remembers lighting one for his mother when she passed. And the way Margaret smiled at him by candlelight on their wedding night, her hands warm as wax. He remembers holding a tiny candle near the cradle when their first child cried into the world. Each flame, a memory. Each wick, a thread of life. Tonight, he imagines where today's candles will go. Perhaps one to the widow on Appleton Lane, who still reads by the fire each night. Another to the teacher's desk in the schoolhouse, lighting slates and inkwells for tomorrow's lesson. One might flicker above a prayer, whispered in silence. Another might simply help a young woman mend a shirt for her father. And that is the journey of a candle, not just across rooms, but across hearts and homes. But across hearts and homes. He leans forward and gently extinguishes the candle on the windowsill. Smoke curls upward in a slow spiral, vanishing into the beams. One by one, the others are snuffed out until only the half remains, low and glowing, like a heartbeat beneath the coals. Thomas rises slowly and sets the cider aside. His joints ache, but there's a quiet satisfaction in them. The work has been done. The light has been made. Tomorrow, he will rise before the sun once again. He will boil, dip, and pour. He will trim and wrap and carry. But tonight, he sleeps, and the village sleeps with him beneath stars and shadow, kept company by the soft memory of candlelight. The night grows deeper still. The embers in the hearth pulse faintly, red and warm, like the last breath of the day. The cottage is quiet, its corners cloaked in gentle shadow. Outside, the trees sway ever so slightly, their branches rustling with a whisper only the wind understands. The stars above remain steady, ancient and unmoving. Silent witnesses to lives lived simply and well. Upstairs in the narrow loft beneath the slanted roof, Thomas Everley sleeps soundly beside his wife. The day's labor has left its usual weight in his limbs, but not in his spirit. His dreams come slowly, gently. filled not with grandeur or ambition, but with moments. Familiar, small, golden moments. In his sleep, he dreams of light, not of great bonfires or lightning in the sky, but of candlelight, of tiny flames dancing on window ledges, of tapers glowing above dinner tables, of beeswax flickering beside handwritten letters. He dreams of homes warmed by that soft, steady glow, of hands that reach for light in the dark and find it waiting, quietly, patiently, because someone took the time to make it. In another room, his eldest son stirs beneath a wool blanket. One eye opens, then the other. He lies there for a moment, listening to the stillness. Then he slips from bed and tiptoes to the hearth, where the smallest flame still glows. Carefully, he adds 2 dry twigs, just as his father taught him. The fire stirs, not roaring, but strong. He sits beside it, cross-legged, watching the orange light dance across the floorboards. One day, this boy will grow tall. One day, his hands will dip the wicks and trim the wax. He will learn the weight of the kettle and the feel of the flax thread. He will know the scent of tallow and beeswax. He will sell at the market, speak quietly to neighbors, and learn which molds pour cleanest. And perhaps, in the deep quiet of his own night, he too will sit by the fire and remember the sound of his father's voice in the glow of a single handmade candle. That is the legacy of the candle maker, not written in ink or etched in stone, but in the steady hands of those who carry on the craft, in the small, enduring act of holding back the dark. One wick at a time, all across the village, candles made that very day still burn. In the minister's study, a soft flame flickers over an open Bible. In the schoolhouse, a stubby taper glows beside a chalkboard, ready for tomorrow's lessons. In a small kitchen by the river, a family eats in silence, faces bathed in honeyed light. And in the chapel, one perfect beeswax candle stands tall in a brass holder, casting shadows on the wooden walls as a single parishioner kneels in prayer. This is the quiet revolution of light, not loud, not swift, but unwavering. It spreads not through conquest or decree, but through kindness, patience, and the steady hands of those who make what others need, day after day. And when the flame finally gutters and the wick curls into smoke, it does not vanish. It is simply made again, by fire and by memory, by a candle maker rising with the dawn.